Welcome to Glass Half Full with Leslie Krongold. She shares her stories, experiences, and knowledge of living and coping with a chronic health condition. Learn about tools and resources and hear inspirational interviews that help you to live a life filled with quality and dignity. With 2 decades of support group leadership, Leslie's ready to help you make lemonade out of life's lemons. Are you ready?
Hello and Happy New Year. I think it's okay to say Happy New Year through the month of January. And you know what? We're just butting up against the Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year. So Happy New Year, Happy New Year to the second power. Okay, so it's kind of late in January for me to get my first 2022 podcast episode out. I guess I just got caught up. I think the big thing for me was I had a series of falls starting in October. One where I went to the hospital because I fell backwards and hurt my head, hit the pavement, and it was okay, thankfully. But then I had some other falls at home, and it's quite apparent that I need help. Walking just ain't what it used to be. So I have, bought some walkers, and I finally got a wheelchair just about 2 weeks ago, and took it up for the second time on a hike with new friends up here in Mendocino. And one of those friends uses a wheelchair too, so I feel like, it's a rite of passage for someone with a neuromuscular disease. Not everybody, ends up needing a wheelchair or a walker or a cane or whatever, but many do, and you just don't know how you're going to feel. But anyhow, this podcast episode is not about that. I do want to do one about that sort of the change, that I'm going through, because, having a progressive condition, there are all kinds of changes you're going through, but losing the ability to move freely, to move independently is significant. So what is this episode about? Well, a friend of mine from Alameda, who I know most people through yoga, Corinne had been telling me about a neighbor of hers, a doctor, she and her husband's doctor, and she said, you'll really enjoy him, and he has a muscular dystrophy. So we finally met, virtually of course, a couple months ago, and I interviewed him, Dr. William Lowery. He's a practicing pulmonologist in Alameda, the Alameda Hospital. And he has a very interesting story, his diagnosis and his journey with Limb-Girdle, muscular dystrophy. He started a foundation, which you'll hear more about. I think it's a great note to start on because he does make reference in our conversation to, changes, mobility changes and such. He's doing some really good work. And I think, when you feel passionate about something, you feel like you have a purpose. It makes having a progressive condition a little easier to handle. When were you diagnosed with Limb-Girdle?
Well, formally, I was biopsied at Duke University because actually 10 years prior to that, my mom had rounded up, my dad had the same condition, a limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. His dad had it. And as far as we knew at the time, I was the only one of 5 children that showed any sort of weakness. And so my mom somehow got in touch with Duke University and rounded up all these relatives in the Lowery family tree who had this late onset limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And then, so Duke said, look, we need a muscle biopsy. Will somebody come forth? And so I flew from California to Durham, North Carolina, and had a left leg muscle biopsy. And there they found that it was an inclusion body myopathy.
Oh,
And so that was kind of an unusual, that was kind of a red flag for a muscular dystrophy, because there's several types of inclusion body. But they finally got together with a group of Finnish researchers and Italian researchers who had families with the same sort of inclusion bodies. And together they found that it was a gene variant on the DNA JB6 mutation. It's on chromosome 7. I forgot where it is in that, but they were able to put that on the map. And that was probably back in 2005. And since then, there's been a genetic explosion in being able to arrive at a genetic diagnosis. And maybe you wouldn't need a muscle biopsy if you had the genetic diagnosis. So basically, I would say probably 2001 with my biopsy, I knew I had an inclusion body, muscular dystrophy, inclusion body myopathy, they call it. But it probably wasn't genetically defined until 2005 or 2007. So I saw my dad, but I was still running, doing everything I wanted to do. So I mean, you know how teenagers are; they're just like really into their own world, and everything else is just a peripheral object, you might say. But the thing about me is that I always came in last in foot races, and I was picked last for a kickball team, and I mean. So, but it never dawned on me that there was something wrong with me. I was just happy to be involved. And, I mean, I had the usual, desires and drives as a teenager. And I wanted to play professional basketball, but that was never to be, of course. But I never put two and two together. I ran cross country in college. I was still, and I did fairly well. And I was doing everything, a person could do. It's just that I wasn't the fastest person in the world. But again, it wasn't until I was like 30 or 30 that I started putting things together. This was past my medical training, and I still thought I was normal, but maybe, I don't know why. I guess you would call it denial, but it was on a very subconscious level.
so you had chosen to pursue, a medical school before you ever really knew what your father had or that you had it.
Right. And it was, again, it was almost a selfish desire to go into medicine because, I majored in a bachelor's in science, chemistry, biology. And I said, I thought, what am I going to do with all this? And I'm kind of a social guy. And so I thought medicine was a nice blend of that. I guess I should have taken over my dad's business. He was an engineer in a metalworking shop, but it just it didn't interest me at all. So
Right.
I chose my own path, you might say. But then through medical school, I sort of had an awakening that there's something to this. Maybe I could help this out, but all the research was still primitive.
Mhm.
And I got drawn into other areas, internal medicine and then pulmonary, which I'm a practicing pulmonologist now, 35 years at the same hospital in Alameda.
So yeah, let's dig down a little more about limb-girdle, because for me, I know a little about a lot of different neuromuscular diseases, but of course, I know mine the best. So it's now referred to as D1.
Right. There's a new naming system, I think about 5 years ago, where, of the types we know that, I kind of like to split things into autosomal dominant world and
Right.
autosomal recessive. Now, myotonic, of course, is autosomal dominant, as I recall, two types.
Yeah.
So, sticking with the autosomal dominants, they tend to be milder, later onset, and with exceptions, obviously, and some can involve heart and lungs more than others. Versus autosomal recessive, which are 80% of the muscular dystrophies, the limb-girdle muscular dystrophies. Not talking about Duchenne's. That's kind of in a different category, better research and stuff like that. So the autosomal recessives, that is the two bad genes, they tend